back to another big week of fun and excitement here on the Patrick Reagan Show. Some Black Crowes playing some Remedy as the lead-in music this week. This show is the remedy for an increasingly dysfunctional and illogical world. A world that is not respecting the rights of other human beings. Speaking of music, though, and on the lead-in there, people sometimes ask me why I play so much music on this show, and they'll tell me, hey, other shows don't let their music play for as long as I do. Well, to be blunt, this isn't one of those other shows. This is the Patrick Reagan Show. You won't hear another show like this one because there isn't another person like myself. Just as there isn't another you, there isn't another me. There might be someone who is a lot like you, but there's only one actual you. Well, it's the same thing with this show. You aren't going to hear hypocritical or emotional arguments. We don't say one thing when there's a Republican president and then do a 180 and say the opposite when there's a Democrat president. No, we're an equal opportunity show. We don't let anyone off the hook here. You threaten the freedom and liberty of individuals, be they inside this country or not, and we'll call you out on it. We're very consistent when it comes to principles here. That's what's made this show so successful. That's why this show is leaping up the ratings charts at such a rapid rate. It's the fresh air of freedom and liberty that welcomes everyone who listens. That's becoming such a rarity these days that when people find it, they're excited to become a part of it. That's the Patrick Reagan Show here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network, and we're also broadcasting locally here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I want to thank you again for listening this week. But before we get started with the national stuff, I want to cover something that what happened here locally, but it does reach out to the rest of the country. I'm sure if it's happening here, it's happening other places as well. Here in downtown Knoxville, we had a vigil this week consisting of about 25 people, a large percentage of them being clergy. Normally, I wouldn't even mention this because, come on, 25 people? There's more than that eating in a single restaurant downtown. What bugged me, though, and the reason I wanted to comment on some of the things that were said by these clergy people, they said some things, and I think they're being disingenuous. This vigil, to begin with, was conducted downtown to pray for the expansion of the federal Medicaid program. Now, yes, you heard that right. These people were reading Bible verses and praying for the expansion of a government program. The story ran in the local newspaper here, the Knoxville News Sentinel, and it quoted a couple of these ministers. One said, quote, "By our faith, we are called to care for the most vulnerable." And this was Jim Sessions, a local United Methodist minister. Another minister said, quote, "We're a group of people who allow our faith to influence what we support civically." That was Heather Godsey, also a local United Methodist minister. In explaining the gathering, she said, "This is the right thing to do, whether you are a person of faith or not." Now, during this approximately 15 to 20-minute program, the column in the newspaper says the Bible passage, Matthew 25:45, was read stating that what you did for the least of these, you did for me. Of course, they're using this passage to say that it's a good thing to expand this federal program. Now, among the other local clergy that were taking part formally were Valentino McNeil of the Mount Olive Baptist Church, Leroy Franklin of Mount Calvary Baptist, and Chris Bryce, I believe, of Tennessee Valley Unitarian Universalist Church. Okay, so Jim Sessions, Heather Godsey, Valentino McNeil, Leroy Franklin, and Chris, I believe, Bryce. I would invite any of you to explain why the forcing of one citizen to give money for the care of another is in any way a Christian thing to do. Now, I've not been to seminary, but I do know, quoting scripture, about caring for people who cannot care for themselves does not involve having the government do it. You do realize that, correct? You're not doing for the least of these, you did it for me. You guys aren't doing anything. You're demanding the government should force people to do this. The Bible mentions nothing about lobbying the Roman government to care for brothers and sisters. No, it says you do it. You high and holy ministers need to put aside your fancy robes and elegant titles and get your hands dirty. You are supposed to care for others, not solicit the government to do it. Oh, but you don't want that. You don't want to take any of your salary and spend it on someone else's medical bills. No, instead, you want to spend other people's money and pat yourselves on the back and talk about how you're all doing God's will. Since you people are so anxious to lecture the rest of us using scriptures, I guess you missed this one from a little bit before the one you used in Matthew 25. It's from Matthew 7:21 through 23, and I looked it up and I'll read it to you here. It says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.'" All of these clergy I just mentioned. And here are their names in case you forgot them. Jim Sessions, Heather Godsey, Valentino McNeil, Leroy Franklin, Chris Bryce, and any others that were attendants but weren't mentioned in the article. Since you guys were so interested in getting your names out there and getting them in the Sentinel, I thought I'd just mention them again. But all of you should apologize to your congregations and maybe even resign your positions. You have demonstrated that you know nothing of the true nature of Christian service to others. You think government is the answer. It's not. Nothing in the Bible states that government is the answer. It's not in there. Standing out there and quoting scripture to support theft flies in the face of what you should be teaching the people who attend your churches. This is why people get a bad taste in their mouths when they go to a lot of churches nowadays. They're full of hypocrites. Now, sure, they're full of sinners too. The Bible has nothing but compassion for sinners, though. But hypocrites are derided throughout that book, and no tolerance is shown for them. But hey, this isn't Sunday school, and this isn't a religious show. But if there's one thing I absolutely hate, it's a hypocrite. I can't stand them in government. I can't stand them in business. And I can't stand them in my personal life. When I read about hypocrites in the news, I want to be sure and point them out so you won't be fooled. And if you attend any of these people's churches I just mentioned, I don't want to tell you what to do, but I would seriously reconsider where I spend my Sunday mornings and put my offering money. All right, we are up on the first break here on the Patrick Riggins Show. Now that I have that off my chest, we can move on to some national and international stuff. We have a lot of it, and we'll get started right after these important messages from the sponsors of the show. And welcome back to the Patrick Riggins Show, your beacon of light here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network and News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Coming at you from way down, nestled into the bowels of this station today. I believe after all my remarks about the NSA and everything, the station has moved me to a more safer studio. The real reason we're moved is because UT's playing today, and of course, sports is more important than me. So
we needed to move you to a secure location.
That's what it is. See, I was trying to, let people really know why I'm here. I used to have a window, and now I'm just closed up in this little room, and Jay is somewhere over in, like, Texas or Florida or something. I don't even know where he is in this building, but he's way far away from me.
And you won't know.
And yeah, I think that's part of the security system.
That's right.
There was like a retina scanner I had to use to get in here, and they just secured me way down in the basement of the station. Either that or they're telling me something about my show. I'm not real sure. All right. This week, yes, to answer the question everyone has been asking me all week, I'm going to talk about Syria. Patrick, when are you going to talk about Syria? What do you think about Syria? What should we do about this whole Syrian thing? Hey, did you hear there's Labor Day sale at Old Navy? So, yes, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Not the sale at Old Navy. We're going to talk about the Syrian situation. This is why they're sticking me down in a hole right here. I've addressed this Syrian question many times throughout the past year, but since things seem to be ramping up, let's hit it again and see what we can come up with. First off, we aren't sure who is using chemical weapons. Before you start screaming at the radio, think about this from a logical and reasoned point of view. I know that's asking a lot from liberals and conservatives and politicians. Almost by definition, they all act in a political way, not a logical and reasoned way. They don't try to do what's best for the country. They put themselves and their party ahead of everything. Heck, these politicians even put their interests before us, their employers, the citizens of this country. You know, I like to point that out every chance I get, just to make sure it soaks into your brain good and deep. These people work for us. We send them to government as our representative. We don't have time to go and vote on things, so we send someone in our place. We're all out here trying to make a buck, working a real job. So in order to make sure what are supposed to be routine decisions in the running of our country, we elect people to take care of that. If something rises to the level of our Constitution, then the people we send to Washington are supposed to put together an amendment and offer it to us to vote on. But most of what the government does nowadays is not allowed by the United States Constitution, nor most, if not all, state constitutions. Unfortunately, a whole lot of us citizens out here aren't paying attention to what's going on, and so our government is pretty much doing whatever it wants to do with no regards to whether it is allowed or not. They decide they want to do something and look for a way around the Constitution to do it. If it's ever called into question, all they need to have is a court somewhere in this country to rule in their favor, and they'll keep trying till they get it. You see, you're paying for them to do that. It's your tax dollars defending the government, or I was going to say country, but the tax dollars are defending the government and whatever it's doing outside the Constitution. If it loses, then, oh, well, it'll just raise your taxes to make up for the money it lost fighting that court battle. It's kind of like heads you win, tails you lose, or heads it wins, tails you lose. I'm sorry, though. I'm getting off track. I know that's hard to believe, but sometimes it does happen, even on this show. But back to chemical weapons and looking at it from a logical and reasoned point of view, not a hysterical and emotional one. That's something you won't hear on this show, the hysterical, emotional arguments, that is. So looking at the Syrian situation from a logical point of view, who has the most to gain by pulling us into this civil war? Let's say you're fighting against the government in Syria and you're starting to lose the war. Now, you watch international television. You have reporters from all over the world covering what's happening in that country, so you have access to information. You know that Bashar Assad, the leader of Syria, has been warned about using chemical weapons. And you also know that the President of the United States has said his country is going to make military strikes against the Syrian leaders if they engage in the use of chemical weapons. The U.S. Navy ships are even sitting off his coast. Heck, the CIA is already supplying these people with weapons and advisors. And everyone in this country, at least, and I suspect around the world, knows we're supplying the alleged rebel fighters with arms and support. So our government has already picked a side. We aren't supplying the Syrian government with military aid, only their opposition. Therefore, we are siding with the ones we are helping, are we not? So we've established that the United States has already picked a side in this war. It isn't a disinterested, neutral third party. It clearly wants one side to prevail. Now, the people fighting the Syrian government aren't stupid. They can see this too. I mean, I'm smart, but it doesn't take a genius to look at this situation and see we've picked a side. So now the United States backside, the United States backed side. I hesitate to call them rebel fighters. They aren't really rebelling. They're just another faction fighting for control of the country, and we've decided to back them. So why are we doing this? Because Russia is backing Assad and his government. You see, Russia has naval bases in Syria, and they'd like to keep a friendly government in charge. The Russians are already having problems with the Muslims in parts of their own country wanting freedom and independence. They don't want to deal with them in Syria around their naval bases as well. So Russia is backing one side, the government, while we are backing the other side, the so-called rebels. Now, is all this starting to sound a little familiar? Maybe like Korea or Vietnam, or if you want an almost textbook example, Iran. If you remember history, it's the Cold War all over again. I covered the CIA-backed coup in Iran last week. If you want to listen to that, just pop over to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Patrick Riggins Show. You'll find all the archives there. Just look for last week's show. So we have a red line, though, that was drawn by our president stating that if chemical weapons were used in Syria, that the United States would intervene. So which side has the most to gain from all this? Is it the Syrian government side? Do they want to provoke a major world power into the war? Do they want to battle the lone superpower on the planet? What would be the purpose? So they can lose a war they're starting to win? So if not them, who has the most to gain? Well, of course, it's the faction we're backing. If they start losing the war, is it not worth it to try and draw the United States in on its side? We've already established that our country has picked their side to back. All we are doing right now is waiting for a reason to help out even more. A justification we can use to start launching missiles and providing overt military assistance. So the side with the most to gain by using chemical weapons is the side we're backing. They aren't going to be blamed for using them. The Syrian government is. Everyone is going to be pointing fingers at the Syrian government. So the question is, how many Syrian lives are worth losing to bring in the United States? Now, as I just mentioned, we've sacrificed people before, namely, like I mentioned, in Iran. General Norman Schwarzkopf Sr. was instrumental in training covert forces in 1953 to help overthrow the democratically elected Iranian leader, Mohammad Mossadegh. Now, if you want to know more about this, there's an extensive Wikipedia entry. If you go to that and search for 1953 Iran coup d'etat, if you read through the whole history and what we were doing in that country, you'll find the similarities eerily familiar to the present day. If you're on our Facebook and have liked our page on there, we're also going to put the link on there this afternoon after the show's over. You can also click that little like button, but don't worry, we don't flood your timeline with posts every hour or so. I hate that, and I know most of you don't like it either. So we only post stuff that's relevant to the show that week. So, yeah, if you search for that, though, 1953 Iran coup d'etat, it's not exactly the same as Syria, but it's pretty close. We weren't advocating the outright military assistance, but everything else is pretty similar in that. This is all about trying to install a U.S.-friendly regime in Syria. And we want it. The Israelis sure want it. But fortunately, a lot of people in this world don't want anything to do with that civil war. They're willing to let the Syrian people fight it out and decide who is going to be in charge. Yes, people are going to get killed. Women and children are going to die. That's what happens in war. But our Constitution doesn't mention anything about spreading democracy and getting involved in civil wars or trying to pick the leaders of other countries. As we've been seeing over the past 100 years or so, though, our government doesn't seem real interested in the rules laid out in that document. And if we don't stand up and start doing something about it, this government behavior is only going to get worse over time, just as it has over the last century. We're going to have more intervention, more killing, more trampling of people's natural human rights. Yes, even ours here in this country. Rights protected by the Constitution but ignored by our own government. And anyone standing up to the government, Edward Snowden, will be punished. As a citizen of this country, you need to work, pay your taxes, and not question authority. That's what they want. But back to my original question, though, how many people are worth sacrificing to bring the U.S. into the Syrian civil war? Is our government behind it, or is it at least giving tacit approval to this kind of thing? You may say, oh, Patrick, you're exaggerating. Our country would never condone the killing of innocent people just to get us involved in a war. Well, yes, it would. And they'll even do it by killing Americans if that's what it takes. I'll have that story and even more during the second half hour of the Patrick Reagan Show here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network when we come back, and News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I said when we come back after the half-hour break, we'll have that story and even more to cram in here. I don't think we'll get to it all, but we'll sure try when we come back. Welcome back to the second half of the Patrick Reagan Show. Your standard bearer for true American freedom and liberty. Something that's in limited supply, but we are planting the seeds of truth and reaping a bigger harvest each and every week. By joining us here at Saturday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern, either over the air or over the internet, you help grow this radio show and extend its influence and ultimate success to every part of this country and hopefully in the future around the globe. Everyone deserves to be free and unencumbered by tyranny no matter where they live. Natural human rights are just that, natural human rights. They aren't natural American human rights. They're natural human rights, and that's all humans have them. Before getting into that teaser from that last segment about Americans killing other Americans to encourage war, I just want to add a couple of comments to this serious situation from the last half hour. Secretary of State John Kerry earlier this week stated that Syria is defying any code of morality with the indiscriminate slaughter of civilians. By any standard, it is inexcusable. Oh, do you mean to include drone attacks in that, Mr. Kerry? Drone attacks your boss, President Obama, has even bragged about approving. We have much more solid evidence that those attacks carried out by our government have killed innocent women and children than the evidence that we have about which side is using chemical weapons in Syria. Now, this administration has all but admitted killing these people, this collateral damage they call it. They even had to reclassify teenagers as combatants to keep from having more counted as that collateral damage. The New York Times ran a story on this subject on May 29th of last year. And Mr. Obama's ambassador to Pakistan, his name was Cameron P. Munter, he had complained to colleagues that CIA strikes drive American policy there in Pakistan. And he had said, quote, he didn't realize his main job was to kill people, unquote. That's what a colleague said he had told him. Now, the policy, in effect, counts all military-age males in a strike zone as combatants, according to several administration officials, unless there is explicit intelligence posthumously proving them innocent. So they're guilty until proven innocent. Doesn't that sound nice? I think that's what our country's based on, right? Counterterrorism officials insist this approach is one of simple logic. People in an area of known terrorist activity are found with a top Al-Qaeda operative are probably up to no good. Al-Qaeda is an insular, paranoid organization. Innocent neighbors don't hitchhike rides in the back of trucks headed for the border with guns and bombs, said one official who requested anonymity to speak about what is still a classified program. This counting method may partly explain the official claims of extraordinarily low collateral deaths. In a speech last year, which that would be 2011, since this story is from 2012, Mr. Brennan, Mr. Obama's trusted advisor, said that not a single non-combatant had been killed in a year of strikes. And in a recent year, like I said at that point, a senior administration official said that the number of civilians killed in drone strikes in Pakistan under Mr. Obama was in the single digits and that independent counts of scores or hundreds of civilian deaths unwittingly draw on false propaganda claims by militants. However, in interviews, 3 former senior intelligence officials expressed disbelief that the number could be so low. The CIA accounting has so troubled some administration officials outside the agency that they have brought their concerns to the White House. One called it a guilt by association that has led to deceptive estimates of civilian casualties. He said, quote, "It bothers me when they say there were 7 guys, so they all must be militants," one official said. "They count the corpses, and they're not really sure who they are." I talked about this a couple of weeks ago with the missile attacks in Yemen. So there you go. The United States is killing innocent people and has even admitted to doing it. And who's been brought up on charges? No one. Oh, but it's okay if we do it. It's not okay if anyone else does, including Syria. Oh, but Patrick, they're using chemical weapons. Oh, sure, right. So I guess dying by being blown to bits by a missile from a drone, I guess that's better than dying by being gassed. Killing people is killing people. It's a crime either way you go. Which leads me to the teaser from the last segment, this killing of Americans by other Americans. Now, most of this radio audience is probably familiar with this, but for those of you who aren't, one of these operations was called Operation Northwoods. Now, this was a series of proposals submitted to the Kennedy administration starting in 1962. The Wikipedia entry states that the proposals called for the Central Intelligence Agency or other operatives to commit perceived acts of terrorism in United States, cities, and elsewhere. These acts of terrorism were to be blamed on Cuba in order to create public support for a war against that nation, which had previously come under communist rule under Fidel Castro. One part of Operation Northwoods was to develop a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area, in other Florida cities, and even in Washington, D.C. Operation Northwoods proposals included hijackings and bombings, followed by the introduction of phony evidence that would implicate the Cuban government. The official proposals stated, and this has been declassified, quote, "The desired resultant from the execution of this plan would be to place the United States in the apparent position of suffering defensible grievances from a rash and irresponsible government of Cuba, and to develop an international image of a Cuban threat to peace in the Western Hemisphere." Several other proposals were included within Operation Northwoods, including real or simulated actions against various U.S. military and civilian targets. These proposals were drafted and approved all the way up the chain of command to then President Kennedy, who luckily rejected them. So here is a significant faction within our own government planning on carrying out bombings and other similar actions to get us involved in a war with Cuba. Bombings within the country. Seems to me that if people within our military and within our government are willing to shed some American lives to get us into a war with Cuba, then they probably wouldn't have too much of a problem providing the means, if not the actual actions, to kill some Syrians to do essentially the same thing. Just war with Syria this time. That's why I asked the question in the last segment. Who has the most to gain from chemical weapons attacks in Syria? Who has a track record of killing people to induce other countries into war? Who is chomping at the bit to fire missiles on Syria? They're hard questions to answer. Not because the solutions are hard to figure out. No, in fact, they're quite easy. The answers are hard because of the implications it makes about our government, the things it is saying about us as a country. Are we a war-hungry, aggressive country? Are we trampling on the rights and freedoms of other humans around the world? Do we live by the standards we preach? Do we abide by the Constitution of the United States? Are we a hypocritical nation of tyrannical people? No one wants to think of the United States this way. We want to think we promote freedom and liberty. We want to think we welcome those who are looking for a better way of life, not the same old tyrannical government they're trying to escape in their own country. This is what I'm talking about when I say we absolutely have to rein in this government of ours. Operation Northwoods wasn't the only plan here. Operation Mongoose was another anti-Cuba proposal as well. You can search for both of those, or you can check our Facebook after the show here, and we'll have all of the links up for that. But, well, yeah, we're already up on our last break here on the Patrick Riggins Show. This is the premier show of the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network and News Talk 98.7 WOKI. When we come back, we usually have kind of a short segment right here at the end of the show, but we'll try to cram in a couple of little bit more lighthearted things, kind of lighten it up here right at the end of the show after these quick messages. Welcome back to the Patrick Riggins Show here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network and News Talk 98.7 WOKI. This segment is usually pretty short, but I have a couple of things I wanted to get to before we wrap up this week, having to do with the bumper music there. For those of you who don't recognize that, that's Weezer with Hash Pipe. This first story ran on the Associated Press and came out this week, and the Justice Department said Thursday it would not challenge state laws in Colorado and Washington that allow for the medical and recreational use of marijuana as long as drug sales don't conflict with a new set of federal enforcement policies. The 8 new enforcement policies range from preventing the distribution of marijuana to minors to preventing sales revenue from going to criminal enterprises, gangs, and cartels. They also aim to prevent the diversion of marijuana outside of states where it is legal under state law. Thursday's announcement follows comments President Obama made in December where he said it does not make sense for the federal government to go after recreational drug users in a state that has legalized recreational use of small amounts of marijuana. States that had effectively legalized marijuana had been awaiting the guidance from the Justice Department. Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper said he understands how difficult the issue has been for federal officials. Today's announcement shows the federal government is respecting the will of the Colorado voters, he said in a statement. Other top priority enforcement areas include stopping state-authorized marijuana activity from being used as a cover for trafficking other illegal drugs and preventing violence in the use of firearms in cultivation and distribution of marijuana. I don't know how you use a firearm in the cultivation, but anyway, the announcement follows last year's first in the nation legalization of recreational marijuana used by Colorado and Washington. In the aftermath of the moves by the two states, Attorney General Eric Holder launched a review of marijuana enforcement policy. The issue was whether the states should be blocked from operating marijuana markets on the grounds that actively regulating an illegal substance conflicts with federal drug law that bans it. A Pew Research Center poll in March found 60% of Americans think that the federal government shouldn't enforce federal anti-marijuana laws in states where its use has been approved. Younger people who tend to vote Democratic are especially prone to that view. But opponents are worried these moves will lead to more use by young people. Now, in a related story, Vermont has become the 9th state to lift the restrictions on the production of hemp. Now, the difference between industrial hemp and marijuana is that industrial hemp has been cultivated to emphasize the qualities that make it useful for businesses. The THC level, which is what makes people high, is not as great as in regular marijuana that's used for personal use purposes. Since it's been illegal to grow in the United States, though, we've been importing almost half of Canada's hemp production. Half. That doesn't make much sense, does it? But my main point in this is what happened in Vermont. The law it passed completely nullified federal laws regarding the growing of this plant. Now, the law states in part, hemp is an agricultural product which may be grown as a crop, produced, possessed, and commercially traded in Vermont pursuant to the provisions of this chapter. The cultivation of hemp shall be subject to and comply with the requirements of the accepted agricultural practices adopted under Section 4810 of this title. Now, while Vermont is the 9th state to pass a law allowing hemp, it is the first state to not include a stipulation that the federal government has to first lift the ban on its cultivation. Now, what you need to take away from these stories is that the federal government will back down when the states decide to start taking action on their own. Just for the people who don't listen to this show a lot, here's the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, or reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. Now, if the Constitution doesn't mention drug regulation, then the federal government should not be doing it. Plain and simple. Jefferson wrote in the Kentucky Resolution of 1798, the several states composing the United States of America are not united on the principle of unlimited submission to their general government, the federal government. The government created by this compact was not made the exclusive or final judge of the extent of the powers delegated to itself, since that would have made its discretion and not the Constitution the measure of its powers. What he's saying is the federal government is not the final judge on the extent of its power. The people, the citizens of this country are. They say, Patrick, the courts have held the federal government can regulate drugs and other things not mentioned in the Constitution. Well, look, if the federal government gets to decide the extent of its own power through its own judicial branch, then the people of the states don't have any way to hold it back. If you want a quick and timely example, especially given what today is opening day at the University of Tennessee, if you're cheering for the University of Tennessee football team to win today, would you be comfortable if the referee and all the other officials were employees of and being paid by, exclusively by, Austin Peay University, their opponent? Well, that's what's happening when we give this complete power to the Supreme Court in the final say as to what's constitutional or not. It's a member of the federal government by its definition. So when it's giving the federal government power, it's giving itself power. See, it's playing for its own team. And then we walk up to it and ask it, hey, what should be the rules here? Is the federal government abiding by the Constitution? And the Supreme Court comes out and a lot of times say, yes, it is, but they're the federal government too. That's what I mean by you're having referees from the other team tell you if what the other team's doing is right or not. That's not how it works. The people are the final arbiters of that. We, the citizens, are the ones giving permission to the federal government to do things, not the other way around. All right, we are rolling up here on the end of the Patrick Riggins Show. If you want more information about us, you can go over to our Facebook page. It's at facebook.com/Patrick Riggins Show. Again, that's facebook.com/Patrick Riggins. That's RIGGINS show. And if you're on Facebook, you can be sure and hit that like button so you'll be kept updated as to what's going on here at the show. If you're not on Facebook, that's fine. Just still go to that page, facebook.com/Patrick Riggins Show, and just ignore all the, hey, you need to join Facebook. Just ignore that, and you can read everything on that page. You can also go, if you missed something, you can go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com, again, /Patrick Riggins Show. And that's where all of our archive shows are, youtube.com /Patrick Riggins Show. And you can also email us, patrickrigginshow@gmail.com. And you can also drop a card of letter here, WLKI at Oak Kingston Pike in Knoxville. They'll get it to me. So, as we go out this week, remember, liberty begins with you, in your head, in your mind. Join me next Saturday afternoon at 4. We'll be fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.
As a dreamer of dreams and a traveling man, I have chalked up many a mile.
Join us again next week for a solid dose of truth on the Patrick Riggins Show.